Thank you so much for listening to episode 8 of the Kindness Rebellion. In this episode, I have another great conversation with my longtime friend, Kaesi Lee. We discuss the nature of power and how to challenge it when it is going to work by any means necessary to protect itself. I really think there's some good knowledge in here for everyone and kind of helping us navigate this crazy political landscape. So please like and share the podcast or do whatever it is you do to show me that you like it. Thank you so much. Sweet, dude, Kaesi, thank you so much for being on the podcast again, man. It was really, really, really good to see you recently. And so it just reminded me how much I love talking to you about all this cool, crazy stuff going on in the world, man. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was amazing last time. I'm glad to be able to join again.
Yeah, dude. And one of the reasons I did want to have you on the podcast again is because in our last conversation on the Kindness Rebellion, you brought up some stuff that just like it totally, I don't know, it really stuck with me. Like one of the things specifically that you said was how power will protect itself by any means necessary, right? I think I had a pretty strong uh, naivety, or I was being really naive about how we could change the world, and I was sort of just like convincing myself that if we get enough people on board, then those in power are just going to they're just going to chill out and be like, okay, we get it, you just got to back down, I guess.
But you called us. You called us.
You pointing that out just really showed me how there really needs to be sort of there will be some sort of conflict. We in any way of challenging centralized power, like there will be some type of conflict as a result of that. And so I guess I really wanted to gear this conversation towards understanding how we can challenge that type of power and how we can challenge people that will be protecting that power by any means necessary.
Absolutely. Well, I'm really glad that I think about power a lot because it's super relevant. It affects everyone. People in power, the decisions that they make really kind of affect just all of us. Do you want to just jump right in?
Yeah, dude, let's hear it. Let's hear your thoughts.
So I think that I think it's really culturally that we'll be able to kind of win the hearts and minds of the people. And then once the culture starts changing, we will develop new expectations for people in power, and we'll hopefully develop new rules for the powerful. I think right now we're in a climate where might makes right, and there aren't really a lot of ethical rules that or I don't know. Morality for the powerful is very different than morality for you and I, and I think that one of the reasons that that we have such a hard time unifying against the powerful and kind of challenging their kind of free reign is that we think that there's a coupling in our brain with money and safety. And when we pursue money, we think that as soon as we get enough money to like pay for ourselves and for our family to get the care and shelter that they need, that we'll be safe. But the truth of the matter is that money doesn't provide any safety at all. It's communities that provide safety, safe communities. And so it's people living together and taking care of each other that really provides that safety. And so that's a cultural state of mind, I think. I think that's driven by our culture, that we just need to stop equating money with security and start really, just realizing that, like, what's keeping me safe is my neighbor next door not being violent, or me not being violent against them. Like like social agreements and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. I like how you tied that together, because I do see the inevitable link of having to not only hold those in power to a completely different standard, but also tying that to the fact that those in power are not protecting us just because they have all of these means and all of this, money and the power in general, but that they should only really be able to protect us if they are within our community, if they actually understand our situation and how to, connect with us. It kind of reminds me actually of Russell Brand talking about how uh, power within like any sort of new system or like with decentralized communities needs to really be more of a, or positions of power need to be a service. It needs to be sort of something that you wouldn't want to be in, something that you wouldn't really be able to benefit off of. And I think that might be kind of what you're talking about, where you're saying that they need to have different standards to be held to, and they have to kind of view their own power in a completely new light, where it is of being service to their community rather than, oh, hey, I'm out in Washington, even though I, am a senator for some state on the other side of the country. It's more important to me now to be, fulfilling these agreements between businesses and things like that in order to preserve myself. Because I kind of often say that anyone, any politician, a federal politician specifically, they almost like can't actually do what's best for the people in their state or city or anything like that, because they're sort of necessarily bound by the networks in their federal position, where, oh, okay, yeah, I want, my state to have these benefits, but that means I have to promote this bill, I have to like vote for this bill, and I have to like get I have to coordinate and network with these massive corporations and stuff like that. And so they're almost like pulled away from their communities and are forced to network and protect themselves within something else entirely, and then it totally leaves these communities stranded, I feel like.
Well, it's true. I mean, I'm not sure if we got to talk a lot about how I believe the nature of power is, which is I believe it's like a natural force, like electricity, or not that electricity is a force, but it's a force of nature, I guess. In that, like, it behaves kind of like it kind of works through us. And what I mean by that is that in order to achieve and maintain power, there has to be kind of an opportunity, and there has to be kind of a wave. It's like lightning striking a person. Like, they have to be in the exact right position at the right time, and they have to have the means to kind of keep and secure power. And so I think that these people who are in positions of power, um, they have to ally themselves with others who are going to help them maintain power, like private security, law enforcement, financial. I mean, that's corporations. Like, they just have to, because if they don't ally themselves with those figures, those stability figures, then someone else, their competitor, will, and then they will get forced out, and all of a sudden they're no longer kind of the conduit of this power force that's like traveling through them. Somebody else is, and so, like, if they it might as well be them, right? That's kind of the thought process I think that a lot of these people have. So I think, honestly, they're just as captive uh, as we are. Like, I don't think that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not advocating for the super rich or very powerful politicians, but I think that the system is hurting them as much as it's hurting us.
Yeah, because I mean, it's just like you said, if they do try to combat this power structure or this system that they're like sort of washed up in, they will either just get completely kicked out, or they could become a victim to it even more so. And I think even if they do decide, okay, I'll yield in these certain like places, I'll yield to the system here, and so that I can achieve this better purpose. Like, I think they start building this delusion for themselves that like everything they're doing is like a benefit to the people that they want to serve, even though in the end they're really just preserving themselves, which makes sense. And you, like you said, you can't really blame anyone for kind of falling into that trap. We just have to see the systemic patterns that are creating that trap. And
Like, why is power so concentrated? Why is it that one person is forced into that position? Because
Yeah.
they're stuck.
Exactly. So I'm wondering, like, with that in mind, with sort of how difficult it is to try and fight the system from within, do you think that it sort of has to be, does decentralization have to occur from within the system? We have to try and break free of these networks, or is it? I mean, do we have to complete? Wow, do we have to complete create something completely different instead?
I I think that every day, every human being wakes up and decides that they're going to continue with this. That we're going to perpetuate this arrangement that's developed over time. I don't think anyone voluntarily chose to be in this position that we're in and to have society be this way. It's just, I think a lot of short term. Uh, I think that a lot of policies that were put in place throughout history were kind of geared towards like short term benefit, and we kind of neglected the long term like investments into infrastructure and investments into our local communities. And so I think we're just kind of seeing the fallout of that. So to answer your question, um, change has to come from within society. I don't see if it happening any other way. But will it will the change play by the same rules that we live by now? No, because people in you have those stability figures like private security, law enforcement, the financial industry, like banks, financial interests. They are very invested in keeping the status quo because they're like afraid. They're afraid of how this change is going to affect them and how they're going to like lose the gains that they worked so hard to achieve. I mean, people are going to get hurt. It's going to be uncomfortable. I mean, not to say that I mean, by what I mean by that is that there's going to be like friction. Industries are going to end, and people are going to lose jobs. There's going to be kind of a shift. And so, it's not going to be comfortable, but we, at some point, we have to start investing in long term, and that means stopping investing in short term, right?
Yeah, and it's almost becoming inevitable, so it's like we have to start. I guess what I've been seeing and what I'm kind of thinking about is having to not necessarily build an entirely new system adjacent as if it's going to be completely, unattached from our current system, but building up systems and structures that are able to weather the inevitable collapse. Because I think what you said is super valuable. Like we can't delude ourselves into thinking that any sort of radical change or any radical shift is going to just be like some comfortable smooth transition, as if it's like, hey, here's your pamphlet, you're going to be able to easily ease into this new system that's good for everybody. It's going to be extremely difficult, and it's probably going to be very painful, like you said. I mean, Adam Curtis has talked about how a lot of people, especially on the left, will, call for revolution and call for huge radical systemic change, but they don't actually realize what that'll mean. They think, oh, I just want the banks to be a little bit nicer to me, or I want my federal government to be a little bit nicer to me. But what is actually required is going to be a complete overhaul and this complete shift that is going to be painful and is going to uproot things. So I think that's really important.
And this also there's another. So earlier I was talking about money being equated with security, and I think we equate power to control. We believe that powerful people have control over the outcomes of events and situations, and that's just not the case. A powerful person is subject to certain rules and other people, just like we are, and so they do have a considerable level of. I would argue like they do have more resources available to them to affect change that they want, but they don't have control. Control comes from being able to predict how things are going to, making accurate predictions, and that comes from science. That's really the only thing that provides control as far as what's useful to us. Is just science. If it's predictable, it's science. It's going to provide that for us. And it's not going to be people in power that protect us from, like a pandemic, right? It's going to be science and health
Yeah.
people. So that's another thing that I think is important, is that a powerful people in power don't actually control what happens. They just sort of react and respond to what happens.
Yeah. So I guess this kind of makes me think because, where you said that power is sort of like a force of nature, it's almost like it's something that like really can never be removed. And I think we're on the same page that, power needs to be decentralized. And however that happens might be difficult. I guess the hard question that we have to inevitably run into is how much does it need to be decentralized? Uh, like Russell Brand thinks it or has talked about how our ancestors or our ape ancestors could really only functions in groups of about like 100 people or so, or 100 apes or whatever. But I wonder how much power has to be decentralized in order to be I mean, I guess that leads me into another question: is what do we want power to do for us? How do we kind of make it work for us in a way that's no longer strangling us and sort of creating these conditions that are so obviously detrimental to our health? I mean, what do you think about that?
I think that happens at a cultural level. Like you said, power should be an act of or power should manifest through service. Uh, somebody, we live in a world where there are some people who can launch nukes and some people who can't, right? And so, how do we choose who has the power to launch a nuke or fire a drone and who doesn't? That's a really difficult question. I think the answer is uh, that you really should only be responsible for your own life. Uh, and I mean, just, I don't know, harm reduction. Uh, this is why I think that smaller autonomous, I do agree with Russell Brand that like smaller autonomous communities are the answer. And the reason for that is that you have to allow people to govern themselves in most aspects of life. You just have to give the people the ability to self-determine how they're going to live and who they're going to be. Because humans, they act in their own best interest, right? You don't need somebody to tell you how to take care of yourself. I mean, hopefully, I mean, not as an adult at least.
Yeah.
And so, small autonomous communities could um, they, being able to self-determine and govern themselves how they want, they can really it's more of a realistic um, way of looking at life, because like I said earlier, security doesn't come from a federal, I'm not going to be protected by the federal government if my community is in decline and crime rates increase and I don't have a reliable shelter and all of these issues are going to be solved by a better community. They're not going to be solved by more centralized power. It's just,
Sorry, go on.
I just think that people act in their own best interest. Like, you have to just believe people will act in their own best interest, and so you have to empower them to do that. And I think the best way to do that is just to give people back the means of production and live kind of in societies that self-govern, small societies.
Yeah, I like some of the things that you tied together there because what makes sense to me is that when you kind of sort of bring up the point that, well, first of all, uh, people should not be having the power to determine someone else's life, right? So, like essentially, what I'm hearing there is power must be held by those most affected by it, right? So then, if that's the case, and you're also tying in this like just realistic concept that we can really only like think about and care about ourselves, or at least like our social group, right? A social group that we can at least comprehend with our ape mind, because it doesn't make sense to try and think of the best interests of hundreds of thousands of people, let alone millions, hundreds of millions of people, because you just really can't even comprehend how to simultaneously take care of and protect yourself and protect all of those people and understand those situations anyways. So then having the power to affect change for that many people is just, I mean, I don't understand how it could ever really go right. Um, so I think that actually helps a lot. That kind of strings together the concepts together. We have to see that power can only really be held by those most affected by it, so that they can work within the groups that their physical anatomy and psychological like well-being can actually work within and understand. Um, I like that a lot.
It, I think I think we need to question our understanding of free agency as well. Like, sh- I want to, I would like to know if it's ever ethical for putting one person in charge of the lives of millions of others. Like, for the millions of others, but also for that one person. Like that's a very um, I feel like on an existential level, that's dangerous. It's a dangerous position to be in either way because you're that level of responsibility. I think is harmful whether regardless of the outcome. I mean,
Yeah.
so if we reduce this, if we can challenge people's ideas of like, oh yeah, like the president can solve all the problems for everybody, or the governor can solve all the problems for everybody in the state. If we can, it's not about, we don't need heroes. We need to empower people to be people and help themselves. Give them the tools to help themselves because they do. They will. They want to be happy and safe too, right? And they know how to do it. Everyone does.
I like that because it's sort of I like questioning the morality of such a power structure because even if one person were somehow like I don't even know how this could even be possible, if one person could actually enact the well-being and freedom of hundreds of thousands or hundreds of millions, it would probably destroy them. It would like there's no way that that person could even exist. I think. So I like that questioning of that morality because it really does put into perspective how is that even supposed to work, and yet we're still pretending like it's actually working. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I like that a lot. I was going to go somewhere. Oh, essentially, I'm curious now. Like, what do you think freedom is then? How can we even I kind of we hear this all the time that we sort of think that America is like the most free country somehow. And yet I feel like the only thing we're really free to do is to produce and consume. And to me, that just doesn't seem like true freedom. And it seems that we've like allowed ourselves to slowly uh, close in any sort of definition to freedom to those two things. And so I was curious on your thoughts on that, especially within the concept of power structures, and trying to essentially govern people.
Right. Yeah. I think freedom is self-determinism, the ability to self-determine. And I'm not, in every imaginable aspect. If human beings should be able to dictate how they interact with reality, from the time that they're born, I mean, I think that we have so many structures and systems and institutions in place that guide people into these roles, these social roles that exist, and then these people convince themselves that their roles are who they actually are, and that is who they all. That is all that they can ever be, and it's very harmful, I think, to reduce someone to a specific role. And you see this in lots of ways. Um, Certain industries, like retail, right? How you treat your cashier, um, it is determined by whether or not you see them as a person or whether or not you see them as the role that they're fulfilling, which is the job of a cashier. Like, and this happens all the time. I mean, human beings are constantly looking for reasons to um, uh, belittle or they're looking for an excuse to treat someone as lesser than them, and so that they feel better about themselves. And I think that that's yeah. I don't. I mean, I definitely do it. So I think freedom means that these roles that we have to play don't define us. We define us.
Yeah. I like that a lot because I think it's interesting because we really do create our identity with our occupation. Anytime you talk to someone, you're meeting them for this first time, it's like, oh hey, what's your name? What do you do? What's your role in our society? And therefore, that is your identity. And I think it's funny that we sort of tell ourselves like, oh, but we live in a free society because you can choose what role. To some degree at least. Oh, I can go and be a teacher. I can go and be, a banker, but what we don't realize is that we're still whittling down our freedom to one thing. We're totally creating our identity through this role, like you're talking about. And I love that you bring that up because that to me just isn't really freedom. It's really the freedom to be. And I can't remember some social psychologist. I'll have to try and look it up or something. But they were essentially talking about this concept and how our society really tries to force people to fully identify with their role and simply try to navigate within the hierarchy of that role. And the example they give is talking to somebody who's you know a waiter, at some restaurant, and watching them try to be the absolute best waiter in the entire world and fully devoting themselves to the role. And this social psychologist was just so sad because they're like, they're so much more than just a waiter. They're so much more. They are a free human being that can literally do anything. And that just really struck me. So that's really what this conversation makes me think of. I love that a lot.
And if you can just imagine, all of the high school age, early adults, or young adults, um, all of those people in the labor force, what they're doing is, working at restaurants, working at retail. Um, these kind of mind-numbingly dull jobs that really produce so little value in their communities. And if you could just imagine, if we could free all of them from those jobs and put all of that, um, I guess, potential into, protecting the environment, or improving their communities, or helping, the advocating for change, right? Like all of that wasted time and effort in these kind of irrelevant roles that exist, and they're just doing it for the quick buck, right? That's a short term benefit to them with an enormous, incalculable long term loss, right? I mean, you're killing dreams here. Like, I don't know how else to put it.
I mean, that seriously, that makes me think like, you have people that are spending 8 to 10 hours serving burgers when those same people could be, working with their community to grow food. They could be working with their community to educate their community or something like that. And they may not even be forced to work the entire 8 hours doing that, because if everybody is working together and fully understanding the value that they can put towards their community, they may, like, with this sort of collective energy and this cooperation, we could easily achieve such amazing things for our community with like a fraction of the time. But instead, we're spending 8 to 10 hours doing, like what you said, something that has such actual little value, and being essentially kind of being forced into it. So that makes me so sad, but it's such a good point, and I think that's something that really needs to be driven home for people. We have to. I sort of saw that, when the pandemic hit, and we sort of were like, oh yeah, let's cheer on our frontline workers, all these like grocery store workers and things like that. And we were sort of seeing their actual value within the community, but not actually valuing it. They weren't raising their wages. They weren't, trying to provide any sort of mental health reprieve or anything like that. We were just sort of like, yep, we totally and wholly rely on you, and just kind of don't awaken to that. Just be happy with some of this social praise that you're getting right now, and these billboards that say thank you. You know, that's such an important point.
I agree. I worked retail in the beginning of the pandemic, and one of my coworkers was this sweet older woman who was just, everyone loved her. You know, whenever she worked, people would go to her line in order to just interact with her. They just loved her. She was just spunky and hilarious. And when the pandemic hit, you know, we got the pay different. We got a $1 an hour pay increase for hazard pay.
Ooh, damn, what are you gonna do with all that extra cash?
I know. And they provided PPE, you know, gloves, masks. They checked our temperatures every day. But all I could think about, and all I could think about as I worked was I would look over at this woman and think, you are so invaluable to the community, and everyone loves you, and you're being mistreated, you're being exploited. And I ended up quitting due to that. I was like, you know, this is ridiculous. I can't be a part of this. And so I left. But that's what I'm talking about is that these people contribute so much more to their communities than just their jobs and just those roles that they play. And you know, everybody needs to eat, and most people love burgers. So like, burger flippers have to exist. I mean, I'll pay. You know, they do, but they should want to do that, and they shouldn't be defined by that, and it shouldn't put them at risk, of course.
Yeah, that's super important. And I think I think it's so valuable that you were able to see that and understand what's happening, because I think most people within our society and our culture don't really understand that sort of the baseline of our culture is exploitation. And maybe they do understand that and just see it as what it's supposed to, oh, that's what it is, but we could be doing things that aren't so, like, essentially and necessarily exploitative. We could be having this wonderful person working within her community to provide for her community and be taking care of herself, because that community has that shared vision of, like, we're trying to end exploitation, we're trying to protect other people and prioritize human beings over profit and growth.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the we hear arguments for the 4 day work week, right? Like a reduced schedule, and how it boosts productivity. That's always the main selling point. That's like the headline: boost productivity even with less hours. Whoa! But what they don't even mention, what nobody wants to think about, is that those extra hours people are going to use to benefit their own lives. Imagine the hobbies, the the childcare potential. Like, there's so much potential for improving human lives and the quality of living. But no, the headline is same level of productivity, right? I mean, that shows how backwards how decoupled quality of life is from what we consider to be production and value in society.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, because I mean, it's just the human costs just really aren't really considered to be costs. It's almost, I think that's the sad part about it. It's like, oh, hey, we can kind of like we can kind of alleviate this, like, human suffering as a byproduct, but in reality, we're paying less wages and we're still having productivity. So that's the real benefit. That's the filter that everything has to pass through. That's how we can only view progress through the lens of, oh, we're increasing productivity, we're increasing growth, we're increasing profits. It's sort of like the yardstick for progress, and and it makes me so sad, because maybe the 4 day work week is like increasing the human's well-being pretty significantly. It's still not the main reason, and it's still going to continue to be pushed to the wayside, especially when their wages have to be kept as low as possible. So it's like, are we really actually benefiting humans? And that, I think that's something that is so problematic about our culture at large anyways, is because we sort of have this vision, or at least I think billionaires and these business owners have this vision of, like, oh yes, we're eventually going to get so sophisticated with our automation that we're going to be able to fully remove the human aspect of labor, so that it is consistent, it is efficient, and it is highly profitable because there's no cost to it. but they're not thinking, how are we going to deal with all of these humans that are being displaced? Or at least I've never heard that become a part of the conversation at all. And in sort of a dystopian lens, it's just going to be, well, maybe we just got to kill them or something, or some people present like, oh, we just need to give them a stipend just for existing because their entire purpose is to consume. So
Right.
I think that's a very interesting point, and I wonder how we can start to kind of move away from the idea that any sort of human labor is a cost, and sort of moving towards the understanding that human labor is actually extremely valuable, um, and needs to be seen that way.
I totally agree. And that's where I think the small autonomous communities come in. Is that these communities just exist together, right? You have a let's just say a couple hundred or a couple thousand people, and whenever they can agree on something, which is probably not going to be very often because people are diverse as well, diversity of thought and ambition, but whenever they do agree on something, that's science backed. I think that's an important part, is that science kind of plays this a central role in um, choosing how kind of resources are used. Then they can, probably accomplish some amazing stuff. I mean, we all have the internet all the time. We could, how-to videos, and we could probably build some pyramids somewhere if we wanted, right?
Yeah.
Not that,
Well,
for the benefit of
that
everyone, of course.
sorry.
Oh, for the benefit of others, of course.
Oh yes, of course, yeah. We need those pyramids. I really like that, and um, I think that's definitely going to have to be something that is understood. And let's say we do actually decentralize power. We get ourselves down to these, like, autonomous groups that just are working together to essentially, like, you know, to just provide existential meaning and, better lives for themselves. I am curious how we are supposed to deal with certain, like, issues, or I guess ideas that we want to have be universal. And I guess this is sort of like social justice type issues. Like, do we allow certain collectives or communities to say, hey, we don't want black people, or we don't want gay people? Like, do we? I wonder how we would deal with that. Do you think it's sort of just they have to work that out at a community level, or does there need to be some sort of law of the land or something, or does that just bring us back to the same problems?
Well, I think if those sorts of measures were being pushed, or like those agendas were being pushed, agendas that were meant to uh, exclude or harm or disparage, marginalized groups or minority groups or demographics, then I would say that that's a failure on an educational level, and I would say that those aren't science backed things, and so or I guess that's an assumption, but I mean history's taught us that's always true. There's no science in this; it's just bias, and so I would say that uh, advocacy would be at the forefront of a lot of those issues. I think if we kept these groups, I'm thinking these groups or these communities would be like geographically defined, and so
Mhm.
you would you would have a lot of advocacy, especially young people going around, and I think it would be even more effective at the advocacy, that is, because you're dealing with a small kind of group, and so you kind of really understand this community, and you can say like, hey, like this guy that you're trying to harm or exclude or oppress. Like he lives here with you. You know what I mean? Like we all know each other, and so I think that it would be advocacy would be even more effective to kind of combat those biases. And I think on an educational from an educational standpoint, it'd be easier to kind of convince people why that they are biased and why that's harmful, right?
Yeah, I actually like that a lot, because what I'm hearing is you're saying that if I like the idea that the advocacy and the activism is going to be way more potent because the problem has already been diluted down to a communal problem. You know, because when it's sort of a systemic or social problem on like a national level, it sort of feels like, holy shit, we've got to have a systemic or national response in order to fix this. But it sounds like what you're saying is that if it's actually brought down to a communal level, then it's so much easier to have it be a community-based solution in that instance. Is what it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one thing that's essential is the free use of information. You know, these communities have, and I'm talking on a larger scale here, like, you know, multiple autonomous groups. They would have to be able to share information and the science that they're doing with each other. And so we have to change how we see ideas. They're not something that can be owned. They're something that's meant to improve the lives of everybody. And we have to share them with everyone. And that means that, I mean, people always say that capitalism uh, uh, breeds innovation, but we've seen that a lot of good ideas that benefit everyone that aren't necessarily profitable get stifled and they get killed because they're not useful to the current elite or you know, the current industries that we're perpetuating, and so we just give up on them. It's like, oh yeah, this would help everybody, but there's no money in it. So sorry.
That kills me
Sorry.
because you're totally right. It is really only their innovation only goes so far as it makes profit and growth for them and for their industry, and then we get like the crumbs potentially. You know,
Mhm.
actually, do you have any examples of sort of these kinds of like almost crowdsourced solutions or innovations that were stifled by corporations?
Well, not necessarily a specific like breakthrough, um, but we can see that the electric motor, electric vehicle industry was there. There has been, it's come to light that these industries really weren't interested in electric vehicles, and big oil had a big part to play in that. So that's something right there, you know, something that has long-term benefits. Switching to electric vehicles, we could have done that much sooner, but there wasn't a financial incentive, and so they stopped that. Another good example is public transit. You know, I'm a big fan of public transit. Not necessarily an idea, but um, we as a country chose to um, sell our community owned public transit systems to private interests, and those private interests um, ran them into the ground, destroyed them literally, and then those same private interests were selling us cars and lobbying for superhighways and urban highway developments. And we all can see that we can all see how that kind of short-term thinking um, really caused a lot of issues and a lot of inefficiencies. They thought, I'm sure they thought they were doing something good at the time. They probably thought highways would be great, but that's why it needs to be science backed, I guess. But I guess those are just two examples that I can think of where capitalism sort of stopped or acted contrary to the good of mankind.
Yeah.
I mean, that honestly, the public transit example is sort of perfect because it really we could have had this pathway towards all this infrastructure, social norms, and resources to build very efficient, transportation systems that are not only going to be available to everyone, and if we develop it, make it more efficient, but it's actually going to be a lot safer for people. You know, we don't realize that having an individual car in these highways is like killing hundreds of thousands of people per year, and we're still in traffic. We're still dealing with all of these issues. We're dealing with the extreme expense of owning a car, and we're all just being sort of shunted towards this system that we think is sort of the best, even though there are other alternatives that if we just give them the time and attention and investment, we can actually make so much better for everybody. That's like a perfect example of how it's actually more beneficial to these industries that are not only going to be profiting off of all of the manufacturing and selling of automobiles, but also the fuel that is used to continue using those types of things. So I mean, that's a perfect example right there.
Thank you. And as I was just, thinking in my head, there are examples of people who have, given away information, and it's ended up um, hugely benefiting mankind. Like I believe, I might, I'm not certain of this, but penicillin, was not. I believe the scientist who invented penicillin shared it, and wasn't acting for personal gain. And he ended, I mean, it's huge, right? It prevents infection. It's an antibiotic and saves a lot of lives. I believe there's been a few different scientific breakthroughs like that where the scientists saw the potential for good for all mankind, and then they kind of foregoed their own personal gain for that.
Yeah, because they chose not to patent it, right? Like I think that's exactly what happened with penicillin. And that's so sad because we saw with the pandemic, um, there wasn't this sort of idea. It wasn't like, hey, literally the entire world is experiencing this, so we need to make sure that whatever solution is brought forth needs to be available to everybody and make sure that it isn't patented or owned. And yet I think exactly what happened here in the United States is we actually, gave funds to these corporations who they would not assume any of the risk for developing these vaccines. And then I think they actually were able to own the patents for them and be able to keep all the profits for it. So, like, this is just the standard procedure of our system right now. And people sort of think that it's the best and the only way.
Yep. Yep. And it really is just the money thing, man. Like if you can just convince people that money it's like electricity. All it does is it allows us to transact. It's a tool, just like anything else. It doesn't keep you safe, it is harmful if used incorrectly. So just it doesn't provide safety. Communities provide safety. We just have to start seeing people as people.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, I mean, how do we do that? Like, how do we get the message out? Because money is so pervasive, so powerful, in terms of not only like it gives you power within our system, but it also is just seen as essential and as the main way to exist and further your own existence, I guess. So I'm wondering how we can really awaken people to the concept that no, money is literally not the answer. It's just a tool that is being used to actually debilitate and tyrannize
Mm-hmm.
us. We need to actually be focusing on something else. Like, I mean, what do we even do there?
I think it just boils down to making sure that everyone's needs are met. If someone has a roof over their head, healthcare, food, water, clean water, they're not really gonna, they're not gonna care about money all that much. It's the fear of losing those things that makes money so dangerous. I will do anything for money if it means that my family is safe and that they get health care and food and water. Um, as long as we're treating people who don't have money as if they're worthless, and that their role in society is to uh, subsist off of the scraps and the leftovers of everybody else, as long as we believe they deserve that just because they don't have money, uh, things aren't going to change. But so we need to be taking care of those people, the people who don't have money. As soon as not having money doesn't ruin your life, that's when I think we'll be on the right track.
Holy shit, that's seriously so profound, dude. Like, I didn't even think about that because literally every time I'm like, man, I need to start making changes. I need to be so different in terms of how I engage with the world and engage with my community. The thing that always stops me is, well, I still need to go to work, make money to survive. You know, uh, that that's insane. how easily you put that, because it just totally reoriented everything for me in terms of being able to see that that is definitely the solution. So let's say we do somehow get our shit together on a national level. We say, okay, nobody is ever going to be homeless, nobody's going to be hungry, and nobody's going to be without medical care. It sort of sounds like we have to somehow centralize power even more, which, I'm just so wary of in general. It sounds like we have to centralize power in order to provide all of these basic necessities, and then somehow from there devolve power and decentralize power while still maintaining that sort of central idea that everybody deserves to have their basic necessities met. I'm wondering how we can even sort of do that.
It's tough because there are national and international functions that are required, or I guess we consider them to be required on a national or international level. Like, universal basic health, universal health care. Like we consider that as only achievable on a federal level, and how those industries, how the health industry works, and how insurance works. That's currently true. Or I mean, I guess I wouldn't be able to say if it was true, but it definitely feels true. It feels like that's the only way to achieve that is through federal, like legislation. But
Yeah.
we're that's what I'm talking about. Is that like who decided that? We all did. We can provide healthcare to people. Um, I mean, I don't. It sounds so far fetched. Like I'm listening to myself say it, and it just sounds ridiculous. And that's how like deep it is. Like healthcare is provided by people who live in our communities, right? They need to be taken care of too. If we can convince them that we are going to take care of them, and that to like like let's just convince the doctors that like, hey, you live in our communities too. Like I get you're making a ton of money, congratulations, but like we just need you to help. We need you to provide healthcare to us because we live here, and in return, we're gonna provide you with all of the stuff that you like because you live here, right? I mean, it's just as simple as that, I guess.
That's so interesting because it's what it sounds like is we can't really rely on the national system to sort of change its nature right now and say, okay, we're actually going to benefit everybody. We're actually going to work to benefit everybody. It sounds like we do need to seize like all of these resources that we have on a communal level and build it up there so that it's just sort of ubiquitous, right? Everywhere it just understands you focus on your community, you help your community. That's what's important. That's what's prioritized. Is that kind of what you're getting at? That's sort of what I'm starting to see.
Yeah, exactly. Like we think that it's so complicated, right? Like you gotta have insurance, you gotta, this and that, and like the drugs are made in um, Denmark, so we gotta ship them from Denmark and all, and that's all true. There are some things that we can't achieve on a local level, but we as a community have to be held accountable to each other, and so it making sure everyone's needs are met on a local level, and then um, becoming a becoming autonomous and becoming free means we have to be responsible for ourselves, and so that means we have to provide healthcare for ourselves. We have to all of the base needs that humans have. Like we have to be able to provide that for ourselves as a community. If we can't, then yeah, we will need help from a governing body forever, right? But I really, like I said, I really think people act in their own best interest 99.9% of the time, and as long as their needs are being met.
I like that a lot. That's a super important thing to understand because, when you describe that example of like, oh yeah, just like it's not necessarily that we can sort of manufacture and distribute all of the resources we need for medical care right within our communities. We do need to source it from somewhere sometimes. That's just going to be a reality. But it sounds like what our systems have been built up for and what our systems wholly prioritize is the distribution and therefore the consumption, rather than saying, hey, the problem's starting with our community needs help. Where do we get it? It's sort of like, hey, we can manufacture and distribute this. Who do we give it to? Who's going to actually pay for it? Who's going to consume it so that I can benefit from it? Um, and I think we just have to start developing that shift. We have to sort of like understand on a local and a communal level what is absolutely most important, which is taking care of ourselves and our communities. Because it sounds like our culture isn't really making that jump. It's just sort of like, yeah, take care of yourself. And the only way to do it is through the system that we've got right here for you. Prioritize your own needs and your own preservation. And it's not going to be by communism and by working within your community. It's going to be by going out there, making money from somebody, and then using that to build your own enterprise or something like that. So we just have to start building this shift. And I think, if I'm being honest, I really think that people are starting to wake up. I kind of, when I started, getting the vocabulary and ability to start critiquing capitalism stuff, I was like, man, I'm so smart. I definitely am like ahead of the curve and I know more than everybody. But the only reason I was actually gaining any of that understanding and any of that ability was because there is a cultural awakening happening. There is people just starting to understand, like, whoa, this system doesn't actually work for us. It doesn't at all. Like, I'm just totally devoting my time, my consciousness, and my abilities towards a system that's actually harming me. So I loved having that realization, to be honest. I loved understanding, like, wow, this is not about me at all. I'm just a part of this awakening that everybody is experiencing. And I think it's just going to keep growing, to be honest.
I agree. I think people are totally waking up, and a lot of, recently we've seen a lot of pushback from labor groups, a lot of labor organizations and strikes and attempts at creating unions. And I think that really is a great first step is, help, let's get people negotiating power. Let's get people who actually make the stuff and do the things. Let's get them negotiating power to take some of that wealth back. And then once we get that wealth back from, the super rich, then we can use it to start improving our communities and making sure all of our people's needs are met. And then from there, all we have to do is cooperate and unite, and we can really combat a lot of the corruption and a lot of the issues that are causing all the problems.
Yeah, I love that because it's definitely been so awesome to see this. Just seeing people finally understand, hold on, we hold all the power all the time. Like, we are the ones that can decide whether this company is going to continue making profits. And I think that the cool thing about what we're experiencing right now is it's starting to transcend political ideologies. It's not like, oh yeah, all of the left wing people are now organizing and building unions. What's actually happening is it's people that are just understanding that they're continually being exploited, standing up for themselves and seizing back power so that they can make real change. And I agree, that's definitely going to be, that's going to be what's building the momentum towards real systemic change.
What's amazing is that we all are here for it. We're like in the audience, like the internet has made it so that we can all watch as this happens. And so every time a crime is committed against humankind, and every time we see groups of people try to combat this corrupt system, there are so many millions of other people watching and seeing the injustice, even if they don't win. I mean, the Amazon, the attempts of unionization in Amazon, I believe it was in Louisiana. They weren't successful, but everyone wanted them to win. And the fact that they were able to do it, and the fact that Amazon responded so strongly, and all of that was seen by millions of people. They're not playing by the rules. They never played by the rules. And so we're all seeing that, it's obvious, it's public. And I think that's amazing.
That's actually you pointing that out is really giving me a lot of hope, because it's sort of like, a lot of times it's like, oh, I want to make change where I'm at in my community, but I'm worried that it's just going to fail, right? But I love that, because the idea is that it doesn't matter if it fails. What matters is that people are seeing it and that people are also being inspired, because then they can say, okay, yeah, we lost this battle, but now we're gaining momentum, because in the end, there's way more of us than there are of them. And so we're going to be able to really create change if we're all just on the same side and seeing the same thing and understanding that we can all work together to improve conditions. I love that so much, man. Yeah. So I think that, dude, I think that is this is exactly what I wanted from this conversation. This was a beautiful conversation, man. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to sit and chat with me. I always love digging through your mind and getting your ideas because you just you and I click in such an awesome way where we can really communicate and understand each other and propose new ideas. And I love it that every time I talk with you, I just get like epiphanies. I'm just like, holy shit, I've never even thought of it that way. It just really helps me grow as a person. So I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate you taking the time to be on this podcast with me, man.
Well, thanks for having me. Anytime, Nathan.
Awesome. Okay, take it easy, man.